Hello everybody, thanks for being here. I'm going to talk to you about some new pronunciations for 2016. I think everyone sitting here with me knows that the Stockholm office of thoughtbot is at the forefront of linguistic innovation in many ways. And we have some ways that we say some words sometimes that other people within the company and the world may not be familiar with, and that I thought we could share with people. Some of them are things that we've talked about individually or in groups. Some of them might be things that I just made up myself, but it's all very scientific and based on the principle of whatever I think is the funniest. So that's what we're doing. I've divided into categories. We'll go through these things one at a time. It shouldn't take too long. First of all, operating systems. There are a lot of these things that we're using, of course, every day, and some of these things can be confusing how to say them. People have dealt with Mac OS X for 15 years, but it's not called Mac OS X. You can call it Mac OS 10, but I prefer to treat the X as silent and pronounce this macos. It rhymes with tacos. Easier to say, very sort of nice, and this becomes a little bit cuter. By the same token, their new OS for the Apple Watch, instead of calling this Watch OS, we call it Watchos. It rhymes with nachos. We got tacos and nachos. And then also we can go on to iOS. That's terribly boring and a terrible way to say it as a little three-letter word. Let's call it instead iOS. Agreed, I'm sure. And we don't want to leave out the people who are not in the Apple world.
I have a question on that one though.
All right, let's go back here.
Is there a food that it rhymes with?
iOS? No.
Oreos?
Oreos.
Okay, good, thank you.
We could have added a cheer onto the front to just make it Cheerios. That may be for next year. And of course, there are also people who are using things that are not in the Apple world. For instance, FreeBSD. Again, it's long, it's hard to say. I think it's better if we make the D silent and just call this Freebs. It's my personal choice here. Then, of course, there's some common acronyms that we're all familiar with. This has long been an issue of like a source of controversy. Is it GIF or is it GIF? And the guy who created the format came in a couple years ago and said, of course it's actually not GIF, of course it's actually GIF. Better though is if we call it Jive. I think that's just doesn't make sense. PNG, that's kind of terrible, right? Like we don't call the nicer format JPG, we call it JPEG. I think we should give PNG the same treatment we give JPEG, and we call it PNEG. Quicker to say, really cute, PNEG. Upload the PNEGs, please. SQL, also a very boring acronym that some people will like to shorten to SQL, but that's dumb because it doesn't say anything about what SQL is, and it's just like a word that is just like not even a fun word. Much better, of course, is squeal. I encourage everyone to use. I've been a big proponent of squeal for decades, and I think everyone should join me on this. Let's move on to programming languages. Of course, we're using these all the time. One of the main things that we use often in thoughtbot is what we have been often calling Ruby, but I think we're all in agreement it should instead be called Ruby. It's just nicer. Rubs you the right way. I've come up with something entirely new that I've never heard before that I think that I'm introducing it here for the first time. Objective-C, which we don't use much anymore because most of us doing iOS have gone on to Swift. I like to call Objective-Ec. It sounds very modern and high-tech because we have that "vec" on the end. This is another one, a newer language that some of us are using a bit. People can call it Haskell, people call it Haskell. I like to call it Shkel. It makes me think it's like it reminds me a bit of this dumb thing that's on Swedish television every New Year's Eve where there's the guy who's saying Skål when he's drinking, right? Shkel. And then there's some terms that actually come from the Shkel world, which we are tossed around a lot. Many of them I don't even know necessarily exactly what they mean still, but I think if we pronounce them a different way, we can make them a bit more fun. Monad, let's call this mound. And monoid, let's call this moind. It just becomes a more fun way to say it. I mean, monoid it's already a fun word, granted, but moind is even better somehow. And functor, I think we can call this funky Thor. Tor being the Swedish version of the name Thor. We could call it Funky Tor also, but Funky Thor is good. It makes me think of Thor dressed in some sort of disco costume. We have a lot of third-party tools that we use within thoughtbot, and other people use too. Trello, very common, but if you look at the two L's, I mean, this is a very common thing in for instance, in Spanish words. Two L's is not pronounced as L, it's pronounced as more like a Y sound in English. So we call this trello. Just like you wouldn't call it a tortilla, it's a tortilla. This is a trello. Put it on the trello card. We use namely, which I almost can't even say namely, because for so long for me, this service is called namely. Every time I see it in print, I always think it's namely. That's just what we call it. Vim, common text editor, is actually just called Vim. We got to stick with that. I think some things we can't just throw out. Now Git, this goes back again. This is similar to the whole GIF sort of thing, right? Where is it a hard G? It's a soft G. I think it's definitely got to be a soft G. This is JIT, and what has often been called GitHub is therefore called GitHub. we put the accent on the second syllable, it becomes much more fun. The GitHub repo. We use Slack to talk about for our internal conversations a lot. This should obviously be called Slake, just because it's more fun to say. And then we have a few bits of internal terminology that we use within the company. One of them is we have this growing website called Hub, which we manage a lot of our metadata about customers and clients and about ourselves. This is much better to call instead Hub. And we have another system we've developed internally for handling some mailing list features, a bit like Basecamp, that is known as Constable. I think it's better to call this Constable. Think of it as two words. I don't know why, but I prefer calling it Constable.
A stable of comments.
A stable of comment, there you go. There's our Constable. Finally, our name itself, thoughtbot. We all know that whenever you try and tell someone the name of the company, whether the person is an English speaker or a Swedish speaker, they don't understand it the first time if they've never seen it. When you hear the name thoughtbot, you cannot understand what it is. You have to sort of spell it out to people. So if we're going to have to spell it out to people anyway, why not make it a bit more fun to say, and we'll call this thoughtbot. Because no matter what you say, the people are going to anyway say, what did you say? Say thoughtbot, and then you spell it out for them, and it won't make any sense, but it's more enjoyable. And that's it. That's the new word pronunciations for the year. Feel free to contact me if you have more ideas about more things. We're always interested in expanding this into new territories.
Thank you.